Tonight on Bridge City News, Ottawa rejects a plan to let the Blue Jays play in Toronto during the COVID-19 pandemic. Alberta has the most active COVID-19 cases as some provinces see infections spike after reopening. And when a young man with autism needed new sensory items, he took matters into his own hands and opened up shop.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm LAURICE Alexander. Thank you for joining us. The federal government has rejected a plan for the Toronto Blue Jays to play the remainder of their 2020 season games at Rogers Centre. This decision follows comments made by Canada's Deputy Public Health Officer on Thursday. At a press conference, Dr. Howard voiced concern with travel to the United States for away games and American teams in COVID-19 stricken cities arriving regularly in Toronto.
Looking at all professional sports, all of the plans submitted, there's none that's risk-free. In essence, life is not risk-free. So it's all, again, a matter of risk management. For the NHL model, I think it's closer to what we would be comfortable with in the federal government because, as you can see, they've chosen the two hub cities in Canada. All the players and all the essential personnel involved with the production of the games have crossed the border into Canada, have observed that 14-day quarantine in terms of their training, and then we would maintain that tight bubble in terms of regular testing, making sure that there's no risk of exposure, keeping them, obviously, the players and essential staff separated from the general public. In the case of Major League Baseball, what the construct is that the teams and the Blue Jays included would be during the regular season traveling back and forth across the international border, and that I think is an issue. And I think to their credit, the initial plan from the Blue Jays submitted to us had them during the regular season, as opposed to the training camp where we had permitted them to come in because it was a tight bubble, a 14-day sort of modified work quarantine, staying strictly to the hotel and sort of the Rogers Centre in terms of training. During the regular season, the proposal initially was, they can just live in their condo or summer residence and so on and be part of the community. I think it's to their credit that the Blue Jays understand how seriously we're taking COVID-19 here in Canada and the measures we've put in place and why we as a country have, I think, relatively successfully managed COVID-19 in Canada.
The Blue Jays issued a statement earlier this afternoon saying that they respect the government's decision to not let them play in Toronto and are in the process of finalizing a location for the remainder of the 2020 season games. The number of people that currently have COVID-19 in Alberta is now roughly double than that of Ontario on a per capita basis. This is following a spike in new cases after the province began reopening its economy in June. The recent rise in infections in some provinces have highlighted concerns over the consequences of reopening too soon. But the notable increase in Alberta is also sparking worries the Western province could become the new hotspot for Canada. Alberta reported 120 new cases on Thursday, its first triple-digit increase in 2.5 months. A plant sale in Coaldale today has people driving in from Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Taber. But they aren't there for the plants necessarily. They want to show their support for one young man on the autism spectrum with the spirit of an entrepreneur.
Carson is an adult and he just finished school. He graduated this year. He will be at home a lot more than he was. He really enjoys sensory toys. Sensory toys help to calm. So I had thought any money from the plants that I sold, I would put towards some nice, cool toys for him. Sensory toys are quite expensive. I love the idea of him raising his own money to buy these items. So that's how the plant sale started. The plants sold out the first day, and then I was contacted by a lot of people that were offering to donate plants if he wanted to do it again. And the response has been overwhelming. I've had people from Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, everywhere, offer all of these plants for my son to sell, which is just completely overwhelming. It's wonderful. I would like to thank all of the local businesses that donated to Carson's cause. Again, I love the idea of my son making his own money I'm not sure, if Carson will ever have a job or anything like that. So this is wonderful that he is contributing to things that he'll enjoy. And there's a lot of members of the community as well that's been very supportive to Carson.
For an individual like Carson, and especially during a time like right now with COVID, he can't really go out into society, and we can't have him get sick. So kind of doing a nice little plant fundraiser. People can come and wear their masks and hand sanitizer, and he can also get that human interaction that he needs.
With many people working from home and having more time during the pandemic, a lot of people have gained a new furry family member. First-time dog owners are happy with the company, but this also comes with new challenges. We spoke with a local dog trainer on how fur moms and dads can navigate the coaching process.
I started my business at the height of the COVID pandemic, and I saw a big need for quality dog trainers in Lethbridge that could deal with issues from like behavior issues like aggression and reactivity, along with doing the basic things like puppy training and obedience and stuff like that. And there's been a large influx of people buying dogs now. We've seen a lot of people going out to shelters and getting new dogs and stuff, and they're not really totally sure what to do with these new dogs, how to raise them properly, and how to give them the best start. Some of these dogs are a few years old, some of them are new puppies, so owners are looking for a large variety of different methods of training and things to help them through behavior issues that their dogs might already have, or just avoiding the development of those issues through proper training. The number one thing to look out for when training a new dog would be just proper socialization, making sure that they're getting, healthy socialization, not greeting every single person they meet, not greeting every single dog they meet, just being around lots of new environments and experiences, especially with a new puppy or a dog that's been in a shelter for a little while. Having them out and exposed to all these new things is important. It's not always that easy if your dog's not good on a leash or good in public and stuff, and that's where it's important to reach out to a reputable, quality, balanced trainer to get those issues kind of fixed and sorted on.
We've seen plenty of businesses take a huge hit to their bottom line these past few months, but there are some that have seen an opposite effect. Bridge City News stopped by the Tupperware booth at the Lethbridge Farmers Market today to see how the pandemic has impacted their sales, but this time for the better.
For Tupperware itself, like our company, our sales volume has just been absolutely ridiculous. We have quadrupled our sales since the start of the pandemic. Like, we've already beat all of our 2019 year sales. So people are coming and they're buying the containers so they get the stuff home from the store and get it out of the bags, out of the packaging. Because that's where you have to worry, because everyone at the store has touched it, right? So, people are conscientious. They come, they buy the containers, get their groceries, and dump it in the containers. People are catching on to the fact that, the less trips you have to make to the store, the better. So if you can store the stuff and it's going to keep longer, and especially this season, because you've got the bugs and stuff that are going to get into your groceries, so you have to be careful, obviously. I'm happy to be able to be a part of this company. I'm glad that things are starting to open up again. It was looking pretty bleak, but you just weather the storm and hope that things continue to go up.
Recapping one of our top news stories, a plant sale in Coaldale today has people driving in from Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and Tabor. But they aren't there for the plants necessarily. They want to show their support for one young man on the autism spectrum with the spirit of an entrepreneur. And a look at weekend weather. Tonight, mainly sunny with a high of 24, becoming cloudy overnight. Tomorrow, another sunny day with a high of 24, but cloudy at night with a 60% chance of showers. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder stopped by our studio to speak with BCN's Hal Roberts about the latest in Canadian politics. That interview is up next.
A few months ago, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, who used to be a cabinet minister in the Harper government, took a shot at Peter MacKay by throwing his support behind Erin O'Toole becoming the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. To talk more about this and the latest from Ottawa is Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder joining us in studio. Welcome back to BCN.
Thank you, Hal. It's really good to be here.
So Rachel, let's talk about Premier Kenney supporting Erin O'Toole. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, as the Premier of Alberta, I think he was looking for someone who would represent Alberta's interests and someone who would also function with integrity and really be able to lead our country well, and he ultimately chose Aaron O'Toole.
So how about you? Have you decided you're going to throw your support behind somebody yet? O'Toole, McKay, Leslyn Lewis, Sloan? What do you?
Yeah, great question, Helen, and certainly it's one that many of my constituents have. I've made the determination that I will be sitting this one out, so I'll be maintaining my spot as a neutral observer.
Neutral observer. Any reason behind that?
You know, ultimately in these things we have a choice to make, and I felt that I wanted to be able to take a step back and watch all of the candidates and their ideas and really be able to champion principles, ideas, values, a way of leadership rather than a specific name.
Now, there's been some fighting going on between the O'Toole and McKay camps. Now, I'm reminded of that biblical verse, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. So the Liberals must be loving this, like, look at the way they're fighting here. So don't you think that really there should be some unity between the camps?
I think at this point in the race, you know, you have 4 contenders. They're all vying for, you know, the ultimate spot, which is to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all 4 of these individuals are going to have to come together, and they are going to need to support whoever wins this leadership bid. It really is up to the membership to decide, you know, what they hold as most important to them, and then vote accordingly.
Many Canadians also feel, especially here in southern Alberta, that there are only 2 real true blue Conservative candidates when it comes to social issues, and that's Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan, where McKay and O'Toole are viewed more as red Tories. What are your thoughts?
There's certainly that thought out there, and you know, when you look at some of their platform pieces and the values that they're you know, communicating to the public, you know, certainly Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan, you know, perhaps they take a more traditional stance in terms of those social conservative values, while Aaron O'Toole and Peter McKay, you know, probably take more of what we might call a red Tory stance.
Or progressive, maybe?
Or some might call it progressive, for sure. Some might call it that. At the end of the day, again, you know, the membership really just needs to watch closely and evaluate the platforms and then make a decision.
You know, many countries around the world, people, you know, MPs, federal politicians are in Congress and Parliament, but not here in Canada. Suspended until the fall. What is going on? Why?
It's shameful, Hal. It's shameful. You know, we agreed on March 13th that we would all, you know, go back to our constituencies and take, you know, a bit of a reprieve from Parliament. The point of that was to be able to take care of those who are, you know, local at home, and then also to stop the curve, right? Or flatten the curve, I should say. Because of course, with 338 MPs, you know, traveling across the country, we wanted to make sure that we were setting a good example for the Canadian public. Now, we took that reprieve for a while, and then we resumed again in April to debate some legislation, some funding that the government wanted to roll out, and then also we needed to discuss whether or not Parliament would resume. At that point, Conservatives made the case that we could return and do so safely, maintaining 6-foot distance, making sure that masks were worn, those sorts of things, in order to make sure that you know, our safety was put first and foremost. Sure. The Liberals didn't like our proposal, so you know, Parliament got shut down again, and then in May we came back and we put our proposal forward again, and by this point we could see that around the world, you know, governments were resuming and they were doing incredible work for their people. Canada was still in this, you know, place of stagnation, and so we really felt that Canadians deserved to have parliamentarians back in the House of Commons debating legislation, making important decisions. I mean, if you can't do that at a time of crisis, then what is the point? You know, I mean, this is what we sign up for. As members of Parliament, we put our name on a ballot because we're saying, I want to represent my constituents in the good times and the bad times. Well, this happened to be the bad times. It's my responsibility to be out there representing the people who elected me to do so.
Let's talk about the debt now. The first 4 years, the federal Liberals spent around $87 billion. Now, according to the parliamentary budget officer this year, Trudeau will add another $256 billion. And that's money that's going to have to be paid back.
Yeah.
How are we going to get our debt under control here? You know?
Yeah, and this is the question that so many Canadians have, you know. After all of this money is spent, how is it going to be paid back? Will it be paid back? You know, and I'm hearing from parents and grandparents that are very concerned that it's that next generation or generations that are going to be paying, you know, increased taxes in order to make sure that this debt load is finally taken off the backs of Canadians.
Was the money that needed to be spent, however, to get Canadians working and to protect us from COVID-19?
I think there's different points of view on that. There are some who would say, yes, this money needed to be spent, and there are others who would make the case that no, it didn't need to be. Here's what's known, though, as fact, Hal, and that is that the Liberals had an opportunity to get our House in order before the pandemic. They didn't need to spend all of the money that they've been gallivanting across the country spending over the last 4 years of being in government. They could have made sure that we had a strict budget in place, that we were balancing the budget, that we were exercising fiscal restraint as a country, and to make sure that we were in a really good, strong position before this pandemic hit. Unfortunately, the Liberals chose to spend a whole lot of money, be irresponsible, and it put us in a detrimental place.
So what is needed right now to help businesses get back on their feet again?
Yeah, this breaks my heart because I'm talking to local business owners and they are struggling. So many of them are struggling, particularly in the hospitality and tourist industry. And so, we know that these individuals need some further assistance. Ultimately, they need employees to come back so that they can be fully functioning. And what's happening is with the CERB benefit that's being given out by the current government, it's actually disincentivizing work. So people are choosing to collect, a check from the government instead of actually going back to work and taking up shifts and earning, an income. What that does then is it prevents employers from being able to open their doors fully and function, which ultimately hurts all of Canada.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was also going to be talking about our economy, but he's only giving us a little glimpse in regards to like having a snapshot of the economy, right? Mm-hmm. And the Tories, federal Tories, have been pressing him for quite some time to talk about where do we really stand right now?
So he's announced that this week he's going to provide, a snapshot. Well, my question is that a snapshot of the past, what's been done, or is that a snapshot of the future, what's to come? So we don't know that until Trudeau actually delivers that announcement. Also, the question is that a snapshot in a formal way in the House of Commons, or is that a snapshot from his cottage doorstep, as have his announcements been so far? Again, because he's postpone Parliament resuming until September 21st, he really is creating a privileged position for himself and an opportunity to tout his own image. He really isn't interested in the best, the best for Canadians. And so really, when he says he's going to deliver a snapshot, you can bet that what he's doing is propagating himself, putting his government up on a pedestal, so to speak, and showing all of the good things that they have done or will do. Now, remember, Hal, all of the money that they're spending, have spent, will spend, is coming out of Canadians' pockets. They've worked hard for it. Now the Prime Minister is going to spend it, and he's going to get the credit.
How about more support for our agribusiness sector? A lot of farmers and producers I've spoken with at Bridge City News, they're quite disappointed with the fact that they approached the government about $2.6 billion, but instead they only got $252 million. Mm-hmm. What are you hearing as well?
Well, here's the thing, is that, when money started to roll out, it was done for the sake of, preserving essential services. What's more essential than food on our table? And so the fact that agricultural workers had to wait months before they finally heard anything from the government, even a peep, is just wrong. It's just despicable, Hell. When this pandemic hit fairly early on, within a couple of weeks, I had heard from, members from the grain sector, the pulses, beef, pork, chicken, all of these industries within ag that were being impacted. Mm-hmm. And they were saying to me, Rachel, we just don't feel like we have a voice. We don't feel that we're being listened to. We don't feel that we're being taken seriously. We're wondering when this government will realize just how essential we are. Truth, Hal? The government never did wake up and realize just how essential this sector is. Not only because they feed Canadians, but because they feed the world. I mean, hell, this is incredible. This is incredible what those in southern Alberta and across Canada do with their land and the potential that lies within their own hands in order to take care of Canadians. Why wouldn't our government want to honor those women and men who work so hard to take care of us?
Well, look at the big investment here with Cavendish Farms as well, how much they expanded, hundreds of millions of dollars, and bringing more jobs. So they believe in our economy as well. Now, let's switch gears for just a moment, talk about the energy sector as well.
Sure.
Finance Minister Bill Morneau, March 25th, says, you know what, we're going to be offering some help to the oil and gas sector within hours, within maybe days or weeks. Well, it's about 4 months later, and I guess a lot of people are still waiting for that help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we know that the oil and gas sector is so important, not only here in the province of Alberta, but across the country. You know, when our oil and gas sector thrives, our entire country thrives. I mean, we're talking about the single greatest contributor to Canada's GDP. Not only that, Hal, but when we refuse to support our own industry, it means that we're having to support industries in other countries. For example, Saudi Arabia. Well, we know that when we, support Saudi Arabia, they don't have a good human rights record. They don't have environmental protections in place. And so Canada then, in refusing to develop and support its own industry, is then choosing to side with a country like Saudi Arabia. And actually then, we have to take responsibility for the human rights atrocities and the environmental negligence that is taking place in Saudi Arabia, because we're supporting it rather than developing our own industry. That's wrong, Hal.
The border's been closed for quite some time, and the feds announced that it'll stay closed to about July 21st, maybe another extension beyond there, because of the second wave that's hit so terribly in many states, including New York State, Florida, California. What are your thoughts about that, about the border being closed for an extended period of time?
Right.
For land travel. We're talking about crossing the border via car, right?
Right. Hal, first we have to remember that, there were many calls given by the opposition party for the borders to be closed, in February. And that really is when it should have happened. Unfortunately, the current government acted far too late in finally closing down the borders.
To non-essential travel, right?
To non-essential travel, yes, of course. Now, in having closed down the borders, they've been closed down for several months now. We know that they're going to be closed until July 21st. And then, of course, it's going to have to be reassessed. And we know that the cases in the US are growing day by day. And so ultimately, the two governments have some really difficult decisions to make as to whether or not those borders are going to be reopened.
Now, Rachel, you've been critical of the Trudeau Liberals in the past, especially our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, when it comes to his leadership on the world stage. Let's talk about China now. They banned a lot of our products here, including pork and beef for a short period of time, canola as well for a long time now. And as well, we still have to get our two Michaels back, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. Let's talk a bit about that, about some of his leadership as well, why you've been so critical.
Well, Hal, it's pretty simple. Early on, several years ago, Trudeau made an announcement to the world. And he made the announcement that he was incredibly supportive of China. In fact, he actually admired the basic dictatorship of China, his words. And, and you have to wonder, if you have a prime minister who admires the basic dictatorship of China, is he really going to be motivated to act in the best interest of Canadians? Well, I think his actions speak for themselves. So he hasn't done anything to help rescue the two Michaels that are stuck in China right now. Illegitimately, I should add. They haven't done anything wrong.
They've been charged with spying, though, and if they're found guilty, they could face the death penalty, which is pretty scary.
They absolutely could, and that is really scary, and it's the job of the Prime Minister to defend Canadians first and foremost. Unfortunately, however, his love for the basic dictatorship in China is getting in the way of his ability to do a good job as a Prime Minister and stand up for Canada's industry interests, human rights interests, and the basic human interests of the two Michaels that are there.
Many people have suggested, including even members of the Liberal caucus, say that potentially Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should do a prisoner swap. The two Michaels in exchange for Meng Wanzhou, the CEO with Huawei. But he says, no, we don't want to do that because we'll put other Canadians' lives at risk as well for being kidnapped in the future. What are your thoughts? How should we solve the solution?
It's a great question. It's a really great question, and certainly there's lots of speculation out there coming from, many different individuals. At the end of the day, really what this is it's a classic case of weak leadership shown by our Prime Minister. And so we wouldn't actually find ourselves in this position where we're even having to give that consideration if the Prime Minister would simply stand up for Canada's interests. Unfortunately, he hasn't done that. He's capitulated over and over again. He's given in to demands by China, and he's refused to use his voice on the world stage. Instead, he's been preoccupied with trying to earn himself a seat on the Security Council with the UN. And that, unfortunately, has done a disservice to the Canadian public.
After pressure from the Tories and the Canadian public, the We Charity decided to end its partnership with the Liberal government. After Trudeau announced that We Charity was selected to administer around $900 million in federal student grants this summer, the We Charity would also expected to receive about $20 million in fees for their work. Mm-hmm. So tell me about some of that pressure that the Tories put on the Liberals here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, it's so interesting, isn't it? So Trudeau has $900 million that he's going to roll out, and he just happens to give it to the to the We Foundation or the We organization. And we find out that Sophie has very close ties with them. Justin Trudeau himself has very close ties with them. So really, this is a classic case of giving to friends. Well, in what world does it make sense for the Prime Minister of Canada to show favoritism to friends to the tune of $900 million?
Well, that's not the first time. I mean, come on.
Well, exactly. It's not the first time.
No, I mean other prime ministers in the past as well. They've probably given out to some of their, friends and, people who are closely associated with their particular party. I mean, this isn't something new.
Here's what we know with this Prime Minister.
Right.
We know that he is now being investigated for his third ethics violation. So the Ethics Commissioner has now announced that a report will be drawn up with regards to the $900 million that was given to We. We know that in the past, this Prime Minister was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner of taking taxpayer money and spending it on his vacation to the Aga Khan to the Bahamas.
The SNC-Lavalin affair.
We know that he also was caught and convicted, found guilty of violating an ethics rule, several ethics rules, I should say, with regards to the SNC-Lavalin affair and intervening in a criminal case. And now he's under a third investigation. No Prime Minister ever before has undergone this many investigations, and no Prime Minister has ever been found guilty of an ethics violation. Trudeau has not only been found guilty of one, but two, and now potentially a third. Hell, Canadians rightly deserve to know what is going on, and they deserve an opportunity to keep this Prime Minister held to account, and that means that Parliament needs to resume.
Let me ask you quickly, just a few moments here left. Will we see an election in the fall?
Speculation, Hal. Speculation.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Lethbridge MP, Rachel Harder, thanks a lot for joining me here in studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Artificial intelligence is a big part of our society. You see the new technology in our phones, hospitals, our vehicles, in so many industries. To talk more about it is Dr. Jeff Zweerink. He's an astrophysicist and a senior research scholar with Reasons to Believe. It's an organization which combines science together with faith, and he joins me via Skype from Los Angeles. Jeff, welcome back to BCN.
It's good to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Now, give me a brief description about the ladder of causation. Now, this helps identify the key steps for an artificial narrow intelligence to move into an artificial general intelligence. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking artificial intelligence, growing up when I did, this is the HALs, the R2D2s, the things that are sentient, aware of who you are, aware of who they are, and kind of interact in the world. And we've got a lot of AI out there right now, which is this kind of narrow intelligence, which can play a game of chess or figure out what you're saying and ask you or order pizza online for you. And so, but the difference between those are very dramatic, because what all of the AI that we have now basically maps this set of inputs to this set of outputs. And so it's a very basically correlative way of looking at things. It's like, I see this, therefore that means this. And so there's this kind of seeing aspect to it. But if you want to get to what humans do, or that artificial general intelligence, you got to move up to the next higher rung, which is not just seeing the correlations, but actually intervening to make something happen. So, say I want to build a pool in my backyard. I can have it look and say, all right, these are the kinds of pools you could put in there. That would be a correlation type thing. But an intervention would be, say, what happens if I remove a wall from the house? Or what if I take the tree out? And then to move to the next letter of causation, the third rung, it's asking, what if I move from Los Angeles to Canada? How would that impact my building a pool? Because the things that happen in Los Angeles are very different from Canada when it comes to building a pool. So that's kind of imagining what could be beyond what is already known.
Jeff, I used to have a pool in Southern Ontario, man. The amount of work I had to put in that thing, cleaning it every day. Don't do it. Don't do it. That's all I'm saying. Now, AI such as Siri, Alexa, and even Tesla cars are almost eerie in how they respond and interact with us. What rung do these fall on, and how much does AI actually anticipate versus respond to our requests?
Well, all of the AI that's out there that I'm aware of is kind of on that first rung of causation, that they're looking at, again, mapping inputs to outputs. So they're seeing this, and therefore that means this. And there's some algorithm for how they choose between different options, but it's seeing this and correlating with that. So all of the AI that we have is at that level. But what you notice is that it's remarkable how it looks like they're doing something more. It looks like they're anticipating, but in reality, what they're doing is saying, okay, given this input, very complicated algorithm and process of mapping it to an output, but nonetheless, it's just this correlation. Input goes to that output.
You know, I want to talk to you a bit about some concerns I know people have with when it comes to autonomous vehicles. What happens if somebody was to hack into the computer, the system, and actually kidnap somebody, change their whole course, or maybe cause the brakes to fail? I mean, there's so many things can happen if technology fails or if somebody hacks into the system.
No, that's actually a very good point. I mean, when it comes to AI, it is one of these really powerful tools. It can do great goods. It can spot diseases and bad or spots on X-rays far better than people can. It's got that sort of capacity. But the more powerful the tool, the greater good you can do with it, but also the greater damage you can do with it. And so that really calls us as humans to make sure that as we're developing this, we don't just look at the technological side. We also have to look at the ethical and moral side. How do we deal with this powerful tool so that the damage is not caused, but we're actually using it for good?
Now, what are some of the myths or misconceptions associated with artificial intelligence?
I think one of the things that plays out often in that is that we see artificial intelligence, and you mentioned Alexa and Siri, and how it's like they're anticipating and they're learning, and we hear those words and we think very humanly about those. That when I'm talking with you, I hear you saying something, and I think, oh, maybe he's going there. I'm actually thinking, okay, where do I fit into this conversation? What's he trying to do? I'm thinking about it a particular way. Whereas Alexa, Siri, all of the AIs that are out there right now, again, they're just saying, all right, these inputs mean these outputs. They're not trying to consider, what are you doing? Where are you going with this? How can I help? It's really just trying to do what it's programmed to do in that sense. And in that sense, while it is learning, it's not like it's saying, we've been talking this way. Maybe it would be better if we talk this way. That would help us get there better. All it's doing is saying, well, I tried this and this was said, no, it didn't work well. So this worked better. So I'm going to go that way. So it learns in that sense, but it doesn't have that higher level cognition or thinking and saying, hey, what's going on? How do I help accomplish this goal better? Because all it is designed is to do is what it's the goal that it's been programmed to deal with.
Now, we've heard that artificial intelligence can learn, but can it think outside of what it's been programmed in to do? Like, can it look ahead and imagine, or maybe backwards to reflect on what might have been? Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a subtle question, because often, I'll give a little bit more concrete example. I can talk about learning where a ball goes. And so I could say, I know that if it's going with this speed at this angle, I know it's going to land there. And then I could say, I don't know what happens if it's a different speed and a different angle. But as I grow, I recognize, wait a second, there's a formula I can just plug this into. And so now that I know the formula, I can deal with a whole wide range of situations. But even though I'm being able to, quote unquote, learn what's going on in this situation, it's still the same thing. So that's what the AI is doing. It's taking what is in this general programming and saying, okay, I can work in that realm, which is very different, again, than what humans do. Because when I go and play chess, I'm looking to win. But I could go halfway through the game. I could say, you know what? This game has been fun trying to win, but now I'm going to see how long can I play the game. There's nothing that an AI will do at this point where I'll go in there and say, you know what, this goal isn't very good. I'm just going to go a different way. Nothing about AI does that at this point.
If you want to play a long game, maybe try Monopoly or even Risk. That's also pretty long too. Now, with the third rung requiring the ability to imagine something that does not already exist, is there still a possibility that artificial intelligence technology can really advance to that point?
Well, there are people who are developing the mathematics that allows an algorithm or an artificial intelligence to do some of those, not just see, but actually intervene and gather new data to see what might go on, and also to even imagine new scenarios. But the best I understand it at this point is there are aspects that it's going to mimic of human behavior, but it still is not doing it in the way a human does. Because again, what allows the computer to do that, or the AI to do that, is there's just this incredible wealth of data that it can process through and figure out. So it may be able to imagine or get to the place where it says, okay, let's look at an entirely new situation that doesn't exist. Say maybe if I didn't move to California, where would I be today type thing. But it's not going to be able to do that nearly as universally or as generally as humans do, because there's also a relational aspect of the way humans behave. And putting that into a computer, I think that's one of the things that really distinguishes us from a computer. You think of what Spock does, the ultimate logical machine. But ultimately, what we like about Spock is that he behaves rather humanly. He actually engages in a relationship.
Now, even with the vast advances in AI, how does its limitations reveal the uniqueness of humanity?
Well, I think as we begin to think about what is an AGI and how do we get to a general intelligence, what that forces us to do is ask, what is it about humanity that's unique and distinct, and what do we need to do to make a computer do that? It used to be that if we could make, or the thought was, if we could make a computer that could beat humans at chess, that would be a general intelligence, or maybe at poker, or maybe at this. And what we found is that every time we've achieved those goals, we say, all right, we can actually build computers that are far better than humans at chess or any well-defined game, quite honestly, but they still just approach it very differently. We approach it from a thought process, but we also ask, how do we play into this? So when the computer wins the game of chess, it never says, yeah, that was a great game of chess. It doesn't say anything. It just won the game of chess. Whereas I would be very excited if I could beat a grandmaster playing chess, or my team won the Super Bowl. The AI just doesn't think that way. So there is this distinction in how humans are. We're aware of where we stand in the situation, not just accomplishing tasks like an AI would do.
Yeah, you're right. It'll just say game over. Thanks for playing. Now, what might that uniqueness say about us, where or who we come from, and our purpose in this universe?
Well, I think the fact that an AI doesn't think that way, that we do think that way, leads to the idea that perhaps this is not all there is. If we can imagine worlds outside of our universe, maybe there is a world outside our universe. If our ability to perform tasks is important, but we also are driven to relate to people, maybe we're designed to be relational. And I find that fits very comfortably within Christian theistic thought, that God in and of his being is relational. He's created us in his image. Therefore, we are relational. We're emotional beings. We're social beings. We're also engineer type beings. And so we've got this great wealth of who we are, or the attributes that we share, that ultimately flow from being made in God's image. The point is to something that's far bigger than what we are. And I think as we get closer to creating an AI, we see that AI will not match us, that it's made in our image. We see that we're also made in somebody else's image.
Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, and Bill Gates have expressed concerns in the past about the risk posed by artificial intelligence, perhaps that we may rely on it a little bit too much. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a definite possibility. We seem to, as a people, be driven towards increasing comfort and avoiding hardships and working less. And that tends to lead to giving away things that protect our freedoms and our liberty and our capacity to take care of ourselves and manage new situations. And so the more we become dependent on it, I really do think that's problematic, especially if we're designed to work and be social and conquer and go out and explore this world, which I think, again, that flows out of a Christian worldview.
How about AI potentially taking away people's jobs as well? There's always that concern too.
I think that's somewhat inevitable. And there's a good part and a bad part of that, because there are certain jobs that are dangerous and humans get hurt. And so if we can have AIs do that just becomes a lot easier. If your screwdriver breaks, you may be sad, but you go to the store and buy a new screwdriver. If you break an arm and you can't work, that's a bigger deal. So there are aspects of what an AI can do that will help humanity. Again, we have to be careful that we don't kind of have that Wall-E type approach where we want the AI to do everything so that we can just sit back, play our games, watch TV, and enjoy sodas on the couch. That's not healthy for us.
So how do we ensure the goal of keeping AI's impact on society very beneficial?
I think it's incredibly important that as we're developing the technology, we also need to be equally serious about thinking about the ethical, theological, and philosophical ramifications. And I know there are people who've thought about that, and there are people involved in that conversation, but we seem to be kind of driven by what can we do at this point. And I just want to make sure that we're very intentional about making sure we're thinking about, is this a good idea? Do we really want to do this? What does it say about our place? And might we be doing something that ultimately is detrimental to humanity in the way we're developing AI? I think if we can do that, we can use the power that AI will bring while avoiding the consequences that would come by using it improperly.
Dr. Jeff Swearing, Senior Research Scholar with Reasons to Believe, thanks for joining me today from Los Angeles.
Enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for having me.
Polls consistently show that Canadians care about the environment. So it is interesting to see that we often read articles criticizing Canada for having a poor environmental track record. So we're going to take a look at that record to see if that is true or not. Today's guest is Elmira Aliakbari, Associate Director of the Centre for Natural Resource Studies at the Fraser Institute. She is the co-author of a study, Environmental Ranking for Canada and the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And you can actually check out that study online at fraserinstitute.org. So welcome to Bridge City News, Elmira.
Thanks, Paul, for having me.
You bet. Well, can you first of all tell us why Canada often seems to end up with a low ranking compared to other nations? Are we doing that poorly?
So, as you pointed out, in recent years, several reports from other organizations have presented Canada as an environmental laggard, ranking us near the bottom of the list of OECD countries. But these reports didn't always use the most meaningful and relevant environmental measures to compare countries. And as a result, these reports unfairly presented Canada's environmental performance in some respects. So let me give you an example to make it more clear. Past reports, when they wanted to evaluate air quality across countries, they simply looked at emissions per person. In other words, they measure total emissions in each country and then they adjust that by the size of population. But when we want to evaluate air quality, the key question is not about emissions per person, but is about the exposure of people to air pollution. A few large industrial operations in some Canadian provinces may skew that metric that was used in past reports upward, but that may not necessarily translate into actual exposure to air pollution in urban areas where most people live. So when we are evaluating air quality, it's really critical that we account for people's exposure to air pollution, but that critical factor was missing in past reports. So we tried to develop an improved methodology to correct those past mistakes, and we closely followed the methods that were developed by some economists at Yale University and Columbia University, and we compared and ranked 33 high-income OECD countries across a wide range of environmental measures that relate both to the protection of human health and the preservation of ecosystems. Overall, in this study, we have used 17 environmental indicators that cover key areas such as air quality, water quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and agriculture. And our study provides an aggregate score ranging from 0 to 100 across 17 environmental indicators to provide an easy way to understand how Canada performs relative to other countries when it comes to protecting the environment. And we have found that Canada performs relatively well. Canada ranks 12 out of 33 countries with a score of 67, which is above the OECD average. So contrary to some previous claims, we see that Canada has a good environmental record. And this is something that I guess all Canadians should be proud of.
Right, that's good to hear that perspective. Like you point out, the context matters, doesn't it, right? And especially when we're dealing with human health, okay, it's not just with the ecosystems, but they kind of both need to be measured there. That's what counts, I think, as well. So Canada 12th out of 33, so that's pretty decent. Which country, by the way, was on the bottom? And on the flip side, which one ranked in the top spot?
So the best performer was Sweden, followed by New Zealand and Finland. Sweden obtained a score of 80 out of 100, and the worst performer was South Korea.
Now, is there any, do we know offhand, like, is there anything that, big red flag that jumps out? This is why South Korea is way on the bottom and why Sweden is so much better than everybody else?
So it's just, we have used 17 environmental indicators and we have aggregated all those indicators to create an overall index. And when we have done that, we see that, like Sweden is the best performer while South Korea is the worst performer with a score of 41.4, which is way lower than the OECD average.
Okay. I'm curious, how did the U.S. do, our next door neighbor here?
Yes, so the United States performs slightly better than us.
Wow.
The United States, ranks 10 out of 3.
But pretty close. We're pretty comparable then. Okay.
Yeah. There was little difference.
And just to get some perspective on this, now you're again, we have South Korea in the bottom, Sweden in the top, and we have again 11 nations, I guess, that rank better than Canada. Now, is there a large difference there, a big gap, or are we relatively speaking pretty close to these other countries, even the ones that are ahead of us?
When we compared Canada's score to the top performers, such as Sweden or New Zealand, we found that there was really little difference between us and those top performers. For example, the second place, New Zealand, obtained a score of 74.7, which is not much higher than Canada's score. Overall, most of the top-ranked countries in our study cluster closely together, and that's why we see that there is really little difference between us and top.
Right. So it's a little bit, maybe if I can use this analogy, when we watch the Olympics, the top 10 finalists running in the 100-meter sprint, it's amazing. They're finishing this close. The difference between top spot and 10th spot, maybe hundredths of a second, right? I mean, they're all good, right? There's no one here that go, oh man, that guy really sucks. No, they're all incredibly good. So Canada is doing well. So, okay. Why don't we start off with the air quality ranking? How did we do there?
So Canada performs exceptionally well on air quality. In order to accurately measure air quality and its impact on human health, we have used 2 measures in this study. The first one examines the extent to which people are actually exposed to harmful fine particulate matter. Fine particulate matter is a common and key air pollutant that includes smokes, dust, and fumes. And on that measure, Canada performs really well. We ranked 4. The second measure related to air quality examines the portion of the population in each country exposed to unsafe air pollutant levels set by the World Health Organization. So Canada is a top performer on that measure, with 100% of Canadians exposed to levels of fine particulate matter that comply with the air quality standard. So overall, Canada performs exceptionally well on that area.
Yeah, interesting. Is there any particular reason? Does it have to do with our population being spread out so widely across the country? We have smaller population areas. Is that something that affects that, or?
So in this study, we haven't really looked into reasons behind any particular finding or ranking. So I cannot really comment on any reason that has caused basically this great result for Canada or any other countries.
But the good news is we've got good air quality. All right. How about water? That's another big one, of course. And I understand this is based on 2 indicators that assess the health risks posed by water pollution, access to improved sanitation facilities, and also access to improved water sources. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yes, we, as you mentioned, for water quality, we have used several indicators. The 2 that you just mentioned are related to water quality and its impact on human health. And on those 2 measures, we ranked 13. But I should note that on those measures, almost all the countries performed really well. So there was really little difference between us and top performers. With respect to water quality, another key indicator that we looked at was wastewater treatment. This is a key driver of water quality. And this indicator tracks the portion of wastewater from municipalities, household, and industry sources that are treated before releasing into the environment. And we ranked 17 on this measure. But it's important to note that there are a number of measures in our study on which almost all the countries do well. So even if Canada's ranking is relatively low on a particular measure, there is often little difference between us and top performers.
We shouldn't be losing any sleep over your ranking 17th, I guess, for wastewater treatment compared to some of the other countries, because it is actually very close, is what you're saying, right? So,
Exactly.
okay, interesting.
We're
Yeah.
ranking relatively low because we are comparing ourselves against a group where everyone is doing well.
And you had also another rank. We apparently finished 4th, I think, for the intensity of use of our water resources. What does that mean, the intensity of use?
Yes, so that measures, that's another indicator that we've used, and that measures freshwater withdrawal as a percentage of total water resources. To put it simply, this indicator compares countries' abilities to ensure sustainable management of water resources. And on that measure, we ranked really well, and we ranked 4.
That's good to know. Now, greenhouse gases, of course, this is a big one. Everybody, talks about a lot. So, how did we do here, and what do you actually base that ranking on?
For greenhouse gas emissions, we have looked at 3 indicators. One of the indicators that we looked at was carbon intensity, which measures carbon dioxide emissions adjusted by the size of the economy. On that measure, Canada ranks 31st out of 33 countries. But, when we are looking at this result, we should also keep in mind that Canada is a massive country with with cold climate and with long transportation distances and even large natural resource sector. Clearly, the size of a country's land mass drives some of its need for energy and its subsequent greenhouse gas emissions. Many of the OECD countries that are performing better than Canada on this measure are smaller countries with milder climate, with higher population density, meaning that these countries have less energy needs compared to Canada. So we should keep in mind these basically natural limitations that Canada has when we're comparing Canada to other countries. Another indicator that we looked at, which is related to greenhouse gas emissions, is low emitting electricity production. This indicator measures the share of total electricity that is generated from low emitting energy sources such as nuclear or renewables. And on that measure, Canada performs really well. We ranked 8 out of 33 countries.
Okay, yeah, again, like you say, the context actually does matter. Again, size of the country, what are the actual energy needs? It is cold up here. In Vancouver, you guys are doing not too badly, but hey, Lethbridge gets pretty cold too. So now Canada only ranked 29th for forest cover. Does that mean, we're overcutting our forests? Can you explain that one?
So with respect to forest cover, despite preserving its forest cover over a decade, Canada ranks relatively low. As you mentioned, it ranks 29. And the reason is that while we have preserved our forests over a decade, other countries have somewhat expanded their forest cover over the same period. That's why we rank relatively low when compared to other OECD countries.
Okay, so we got to get busy and plant some more trees. All right. On the biodiversity front, how did we compare with other nations as to the number of species we have at risk?
So yes, we looked at that. That indicator, which measures the number of species that are in risk of extinction as a percentage of total known species, and we ranked relatively well. We ranked 12 out of 33 countries.
Okay. Of course, Canada, known for a large agricultural industry here. How was our record on environmental issues there related to agriculture with for fertilizer use, for example?
Canada has a really good record on environmental issues related to agriculture. So, among the main concerns relating to agriculture are excessive use of fertilizers and intensive use of pesticides. So, we compared and ranked countries based on the intensity of using fertilizer in agricultural system, and Canada ranks really well. We ranked 4. And we also compared countries on average pesticide use per area of cropland. And again, we ranked relatively well. We ranked 11 out of the 33 countries.
Okay. Well, I'm up against the clock here, Elmira, but big picture, Canada sounds like does not have any major reasons to be overly concerned with our environmental record in comparison to other OECD nations, correct?
Exactly. The evidence is clear. Most developed countries have established sound environmental protection regimes, and Canada fares well when compared to other high-income countries.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today, Elmira. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Elmira Ali-Akbari, co-author of the study Environmental Ranking for Canada and the OECD. You can actually check that out online for yourself, FraserInstitute.org. And on behalf of all of us here at BCN, thank you so much for watching today.